All right, here outside Loon's Nest, they are a coffee shop in the Mid-Gunflint Trail area. Bob and the crew are up and running now for the 2026 season. Beautiful morning, and it's busy out here. And first cardamom rolls of the year. Let's take a look at the... Ooh, yes! We got a half dozen cardamom rolls headed up to Gunflint on this beautiful day. Bob and the crew are open now 7 days a week. 7 to 2, and that's all the way through the summer into October. So stop by Loon's Nest Coffee right here in the Mid-Gunflint Trail area. Mention that you heard about Loon's Nest on the Paddle and Portage podcast. Loon's Nest, best coffee on the Gunflint.
Welcome to the Paddle and Portage podcast. Today we venture out of the boundary waters to a river. But this trip didn't start in the river. It started at Canoecopia.
Someone approached the booth and had a conversation with you, most specifically, although I do remember saying hi to Deanna and talking about the St. Louis River near Duluth. But you two had shared a bond, I would say, about your experience with estuaries in particular. Tell us about that, LB.
Indeed, yeah. Deanna, knowing that we're from this region on the eastern end of the boundary waters, immediately asked if I knew about the St. Louis Estuary, of which I had no idea that there were estuaries on Lake Superior. And it caught my attention because I spent a year doing estuary education out in the San Francisco Bay, and I loved that time in life. So we got talking, and I was asking her loads of questions about what this place is, and it led to an invitation. Deanna invited you and I to join her in a ensemble of passionate folks for a paddle, quite a long paddle.
And so on a beautiful early summer, late spring day, we headed down from Grand Marais to Duluth and did exactly that.
Meet us at the landing, right after this word from our beloved sponsor.
Dan and Karen Cook founded Cook Custom Sewing 40 years ago. Their son Nathan may have begun sewing before he could walk. Regardless, he grew up amid the clacking rattle of sewing machines creating outdoor gear. Nathan had already taken over CCS when cancer claimed Dan last summer. He is continuing the family tradition of creating functional camping equipment engineered to last a lifetime. I've always loved the tagline, locally sewn, globally tested, because it embodies Cook Custom Sewing. CCS gear has been on every continent, but it's all made right here in Minnesota by people that love the outdoors and are making living wages. Whether you're headed to the BWCA or the Arctic, you can rely on CCS. And I should let you know that my name is Bear Paulson from both North Star Canoes and Paddle and Portage. I've known the Cook family for more than 3 decades, and I have CCS gear that has lasted 30 years to prove it. Check out all the canoe packs and packing systems, the ultra-lightweight tarps and shelters, and plenty of other great gear at cookcustomsewing.com.
We're here on the banks of the St. Louis River, and I'm with Deanna. And Deanna, we met you at Canoecopia, and
it's true.
You are the director of
the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve, hereinafter the Reserve.
The Reserve from here on out on this journey of ours, which we're about to embark on. We're paddling from where to where today?
So we are here at the top of the St. Louis River Estuary in Chambers Grove, which is a City of Duluth park. If we were to go that way, we eventually hit the Fond du Lac Dam, but we're going to go that way, out towards Lake Superior. So as we go out today, it's going to widen and widen and widen, and then eventually we'll tuck into a smaller river in Superior called the Pokegama River.
Okay, and this area has a bit of a checkered past. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. This area, well, I like to think about its really important role throughout all of human history, and so this place is a really significant place, had a lot of wild rice beds for a long time for Ojibwe people. And then it also, because it's the largest river going into Lake Superior in the United States, it became one of the biggest ports in the Great Lakes, and the biggest port in the Great Lakes today, and the furthest inland port in the continent. And so because of that, you could get ships in here. A lot of industry developed around the river. Pre-Clean Water Act, so a lot of stuff got washed in. And then we've spent the last 25 years cleaning up messes, and it's doing really well, actually.
Excellent. And we're going to go in there and check out where it's doing really well and see this with our own eyes. And along this route that we're going to be on today, there's opportunities for recreation, of course, paddling, camping, and advanced exploration beyond just like a simple paddle down the river.
Right. And that's what's really amazing about the cleanup efforts is that just a couple of years ago, the St. Louis River Estuary was designated as a national water trail. And so there's a National Park Service staff in the city of Duluth who helps manage that, and the St. Louis River Alliance also helps, really leads the outreach around that. So we're going to cross a bunch of little water trail routes as we go. We're doing kind of like connecting through them to go down the whole estuary. The water trail's set up for people who might be newer to paddling. So there's a smaller route where you might just explore a couple islands, or a smaller route you might take just to really look at birds because it's a really great birding spot. But we're gonna travel across many routes as we go in through the Pokegama, but we'll be on the water trail the whole time.
Awesome. And anybody can just show up here. And
you can just show up, just park, drop a boat in. You can paddle for 2 hours on your way to the Boundary Waters.
When we head out today, Paddle and Portage Podcast will be documenting this, but who's coming with us?
Who's coming with us? We got Kirsten Rude. She's the stewardship coordinator at the reserve. She takes care of land and water. We got Molly Wick. She is the research coordinator. Today is her first day on the job at the reserve. And then we got Michaela Erickson, and she is the National Water Trail Coordinator for the nonprofit St. Louis River Alliance.
Great.
Let's get on the water?
Yeah.
Yeehaw!
We launched onto our journey to the river. 3 canoes, 6 people. We were paddling a North Star.
North Wind 17. Great canoe, perhaps the most versatile Boundary Waters canoe of them all. What up, Bear Paulson?
Shout out. We passed under a bridge, just sort of getting accustomed to the flow of the current, which was very mellow. Pretty immediately, we had our first wildlife sighting.
Pelicans. The pelicans.
I mean, and what's so funny is those pelicans, they're a fixture of my time in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And I don't see them all that often. Count on one hand how many times I've seen pelicans in the North Woods. But there they were.
And right there, too, on a branch hanging out on this submerged tree that was sticking out of the river. They were just all, the 3 of them, hanging out on that branch, essentially. And one was kind of sleeping, doing its thing. The other one in particular of the 3 seemed like it was on guard, sort of like, I'm on the lookout.
It was certainly eyeballing us as we paddled around, and as I pulled out the camera to get some video for the YouTube channel. And it occurred to me, as we talked about it, these birds aren't here to nest. They're passing through. And it was a really great introduction to the reality of how important this waterway is to migrating birds and the richness that this estuary has, especially as opposed to Lake Superior, which doesn't have a lot of resources for birds to survive on. This estuary delivered. And that sets the stage for all the migratory birds we continue to see on the paddle.
Not too far after we saw the pelicans, we came around and learned more about some of the islands that we were passing through, and soon thereafter stepped out onto one of the islands.
We followed Deanna's lead, pull up under a massive willow tree, got off with kind of a drop-off. We got out of the canoe and fumbled around to find something to tie off with, because it was a little too high to get the canoe up out of the water. You used your innovative tackle box to secure our canoe with a stringer.
One of our nylon fish stringers, like the kind you get at a gas station for a couple bucks, a yellow one, and ran it through, and it held great. Good emergency use of a stringer if you're not catching many fish on any particular day. It can help secure your canoe.
Ingenuity for sure. We did grab a bow line from Deanna after that, but Deanna sort of took the lead and headed straight into the interior of the island, bushwhack style, and we're quick to follow her and the rest of the group. And we actually didn't go very far before the terrain opened up into a giant interior bay of this large island. And it was noisy.
The sound of trumpets filled the air as though a high school marching band was going by. And it wasn't a band. It was a bunch of trumpeter swans.
So Mahnomen is a social ecological keystone. So it's like crucial for human communities and crucial for nature. It feeds everybody. So this spring we had just tons and tons and tons of ducks in here. The swans are another example because there's food at a really crucial time. Like there's wild rice seed on the bottom, or in the fall they were in the wild rice beds, lots of different birds going through. We actually got to rice out here this fall because it was a site where we were testing the rice to make sure the rice is healthy here. And so far it looks like it is, which is really cool. The islands in the estuary are just really particularly important for, especially as part of the flyway, as part of the migration patterns of a lot of creatures. So that's why we saw the pelicans earlier, because the estuary is feeding them so they can keep going. Hey, I'm Kirsten Rood. I'm the stewardship coordinator here at the Lake Superior Reserve, where I get to help working on caretaking of the lands and waters of the St. Louis River Estuary and Lake Superior. We're on North Duck Hunter Island, which is one of the sites that the reserve has been working on restoration of black ash wetlands here. So kind of in the distance behind me, you can see the black ash trees that haven't really leafed out yet. Part of that is because it's still a little early in the season, but it's also because emerald ash borer has been here since about 2014, so just over a decade, and has had a really devastating impact on the ash forests here in the St. Louis River Estuary. Something like 99% of black ash trees die during a emerald ash borer infestation, and so there's less and less kind of leaf out in the canopy every year, and eventually these black ash wetland forests, there won't be much ash here anymore. So the reserve was working on a project to do some understory planting to try and maintain these sites as wetland forests, and over the course of 3 years we planted 32,000 seedlings of different tree species underneath, trying to maintain these sites as wetland forests to help keep some of the ecosystem function of these wetland forests, like holding these sites together. We're around a Mahnomen, or wild rice restoration site, so holding these sites, these islands in place to protect the rice, as well as evapotranspiration, or kind of sucking up the water to help regulate and maintain water levels. These are also really important habitats for a lot of different species, including birds and migratory birds. So some of the trees that we did particularly well in the planting, we also have monitoring plots at each of these sites to see which trees both survive and grow. And some of the trees that did particularly well were northern hackberry, swamp white oak, and elm and basswood. All of those are kind of at the northern end of their range here in the St. Louis River Estuary, which is also promising as we think about not just now, but in the future.
As we climbed off the island and back into the canoes, continued our journey downstream, there was a stark difference between the river right and river left. And on the Wisconsin side to our right, it was completely undeveloped. The sandstone and sand is it's like the dominant composition of the landscape there on the South Shore, which essentially this was. And so there were large sandstone outcroppings with marshes in between, had the real feeling of wildness. And on the left, there were some houses and some distinct access for anglers to be able to fish from shore, We passed by one of the deepest parts of the estuary where there were a handful of anglers, seeing what they could pull out of the water. But eventually the wind started picking up.
It did, and there was a bit of, at least my stomach growling around this time as well. And so before we hit the next big expanse, we pulled to shore once again and stopped for lunch.
The agenda item for this component of our trip was a potluck. And since we drove from Grand Marais that same morning, the best we could pull off was a couple of sandwiches. However, the spread that this small crew of canoeists brought to that log was memorable.
In other words, they brought food to share, and we brought food for ourselves.
Exactly. But I believe everything on that spread had some connection to the landscape. There was a wild rice dish that came from hand-harvested wild rice. There was a couple of different dishes that involved hand-harvested ramps. Most memorable to me was the ramp butter, which I immediately smeared on both sides of my sandwich and added a huge benefit to the meal. But the whole energy of lunch was the same that all these passionate people have about the place, and it is sharing. They were there to share their food. They were there to share that place with us. And as we sat and ate lunch on the island, we got to have some time about sharing each other's stories. We got to talk with Molly Wick. She did some pretty extensive research on folks' connection to the water and to the estuary, to Lake Superior. She had a lot to say about this connection.
I'm Molly Wick. I'm the new research coordinator at the Lake Superior National Estuarine Research Reserve. A lot of what the folks I talked to shared resonated so much because a lot of people talked about like their childhood experiences, and so that's no exception for me. Like, I grew up camping with my family and canoeing with my dad, and after college I moved out to New Mexico where there's no water at all, or the water's very brown, and most places are dry, and I really missed being around water, and so that's what drew me back to this area. And the other thing is I grew up on Lake Michigan, and so I think just like Duluth, if you live on a Great Lake, it's just this like anchoring feeling of like wherever you go, you always like know where you are relative to the lake. And so I had been to Duluth, and I knew that I would have that here as well. And I think a lot of people that move to Duluth from somewhere else move here for the lake, and then they realize that there's also this amazing estuary that a lot fewer people talk about. And so I've lived here for maybe 15 years or so, and over the course of that time, I've been exploring this area both for work and with my dogs or on the water where I can. And I think what is really amazing about this area is that it feels like a natural playground. Like there's so few other places where you have this much shoreline that's natural that you can explore. And I think some of my favorite memories in the time that I've been here have been exploring, going out and picking a place on a map where there's a launch or a trail or something that I've never been, and just going and exploring and like discovering that sense of like discovering what's there. And it's all like within a 15-minute drive. Like it's in the backyard. And I don't know that there's never been anywhere else that I've lived where it's been like that, where it feels like this like wilderness out the back door. And I think that all of those sort of like categories that we came up with from the interviews, those different ways that people connect with water through work, through traditions, spirituality, social connections, like I could see all of those in my own life. And I think what was really cool about doing that research as well is like, you take it for granted, right? Like, you don't necessarily think about these things. You're like, oh, it's Saturday, I'm going to go out and have fun with my friends and like go for a paddle or whatever. But doing that research really helped me like realize the value in my own life and not take that for granted as much. And this place is like, it gets cold, obviously, but especially this time of year, it's like, it doesn't get much better. Like, I can't imagine anywhere else where I would want to live, that you can get back in the woods, get on the water so easily. And a bunch of people mentioned the sensation or the feeling of coming over the hill, coming back into Duluth, and sort of going around the bend and over the top of the hill and just seeing the estuary like laid out in front of them, and the lift bridge and Lake Superior off in the distance, and that like feeling of like, I'm home, like here I am. And I think like that was something that resonated with me as well so much, just like that feeling of the sky and the water and that sense of like being home. And I think in Duluth we're lucky to have a lot of windows that overlook the lake and the estuary.
50 years ago, a group of friends met at a diner and began to organize a movement. They called themselves Friends of the Boundary Waters. Through grassroots organizing, they fought to make the Boundary Waters the protected wilderness it is today. For 50 years, we've defended the Boundary Waters. Our strength is in our members. It is in you. To learn more and join this movement, please visit friends-bwca.org.
After that delicious lunch, we got back in the canoes and pretty soon thereafter realized that we had some ground to cover. In fact, we'd only gone about a third of the distance we'd be traveling on this particular day, and the day was about half over. So it was time to start moving, digging down a little bit, and covering some ground.
At this point, the day that we thought would be gentle 5-mile-an-hour breeze had turned into a pretty stiff headwind. As we all sort of shifted into whatever rhythm of paddling was needed to stay pointed into the wind, we spread out quite a bit in order to make our way through the slowly widening channel. We entered a particular part of the estuary called Foundation Bay. In this area, out in the middle of the water, were these large, crumbling stone walls. And we saw a bird there, didn't we?
Cormorant.
Indeed, another migratory seabird that was notable on our trip. We didn't know why this obscure stone structure was out crumbling in the middle of the lake. Sure wish we had somebody around us to ask, but the wind didn't make that possible. We later found out that whole bay was a massive logging operation with a lot of cleanup.
Yeah, it was really interesting to think about the huge pine that, I've only read about or seen photos of to that point, floating down from the north and being brought in through Lake Superior, through the harbor, up the river, and then to a major processing site at the mill, and the scraps sort of being discarded out into the river and pulp and just sort of a dumping ground for wood, a natural byproduct, but still plugging up the river and impacting the health of the ecosystem and sort of choking it out, essentially.
Exactly. One of the impacts of all of this logging and milling debris was that it settled to the floor of the estuary and filled the space to such an extent that oxygen could no longer be produced in the estuary. There was no photosynthesis that could even occur. And this is one of the main contributing factors to why the river at one point was dead.
And then you add into that more industry. U.S. Steel having a huge site now on the river back at that time, and it has now been cleaned up, but we could see on the hillside where that plant used to be, pollution, just a very unhealthy river for a long stretch of time, a generation or more even, had not known the estuary as we were seeing it on this, albeit somewhat windy but beautiful day.
essentially we're learning in real time more about the pride that these folks have in this place and the massive restoration project that it is to bring the river that's currently hammering us with wind back to life.
And so we all kept paddling. We reconnected after Foundation Bay, and we're coming up on a bridge crossing, railroad and vehicle bridge. And Molly pointed out that she used to rent a spot there near the bridge, and the reserve has some water testing equipment right in that general area as well that they pointed out to us. And so we reconnected a bit before we really hit an open spot, the biggest, widest spot of the estuary that we paddled across. And that wind had only picked up during that stretch.
Pokegama Bay, preceded by Little Pokegama Bay, felt much more like a lake. And once again, we spread out, paddling into the wind, but we knew where we were going, and we had a meetup site. You could tell that that spot was in the sun, out of the wind, sandy, and perfectly placed with a picnic table for our little rendezvous.
We reconnected there, and I had an opportunity to talk with a member of our paddling group that day who's really enthusiastic about getting people on the water, sharing information about the water trail that we were on that day, and having people interact with the St. Louis River Estuary and Water Trail.
My name is Michaela Erickson. I'm the National Water Trail Coordinator here in Duluth, Minnesota, working for the St. Louis River Alliance, which is a member-based nonprofit focused on connecting, restoring, and enhancing the St. Louis River. Yeah, so my connection to this waterway, I do live here in the Duluth Superior region, so the Twin Ports, but I moved up here for school 11 years ago, and I've always felt best and happiest around nature. So it did help. I got a job which protects and restores the river. So I've been with the St. Louis River Alliance 7 years now, but it's really the community that connected me to the river as well. Yeah, so we are pretty close to the end of the National Water Trail right now. So the end of it is going to be starting pretty much where it meets Lake Superior. This is about the heart of it, although the St. Louis River watershed, like this river flows about 192 miles. So, yeah, we're kind of towards the wit's end of it.
Okay. And so when you look out here, we got some boats floating around. We got this island out here, Spirit Island, is it called?
Yep, we're right by Spirit Island and Clough Island right now. So we're pretty close to Munger Landing, and anyone who's local in Duluth, we're on our way to Pokegama Bay. So we're going to end over in Superior there in some calmer water.
Okay. Do you know people who paddle around out here? Like, is this a locals paddle spot, or where does it fit into the local paddle scene?
Yeah, so it is a local spot. I'd say a lot of people are using Munger Landing, and they're doing that Clough Island loop, which is the island we're on now. So we're on the south side of Clough Island on the resting spot. There is a lot of fishermen, but I've even seen stand-up paddleboards go around here. You do have to be aware of the wake that the motorboats create, but it's a really big mix of everything. This is like the best spot in Duluth, honestly. Otherwise, you have lake options, but this offers such a variety of marsh birds. You can see sturgeon jumping out of the water. You can see monomen, so wild rice growing pretty soon here. So it's a really big success story, and like people are hearing about it. And a great resource is going to be stlouisriver.org, where you can plan your trip. There's itineraries. There's a lot of really good resources on regulations and where to go, how to access, where to do it safely.
Yeah, sweet. So we're like in the best spot to paddle a canoe in Duluth.
Truly, we are.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for bringing us here. This is awesome.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. And what's the fishing scene out here? Like, if we came here, what might we catch?
Yeah, so the fishing scene is growing, but you can catch crappies, northern, muskie, bass, perch. I've heard the DNR say that they stock 50,000 walleye over by Chambers, so that's going to be why we saw those pelicans stopping over. There's plenty of food. And the Fond du Lac tribe has worked a lot on the degraded habitat for those wild fish populations, kind of around those eddies. So the fish are kind of a huge success story, but all of the population's coming back. Sometimes people go ice fishing, but there is some incidents every year where you do have to be careful. So using your proper ice safety, since rivers are moving, you have to really check ice thickness.
Okay, sure. Is this a campsite here, or what is this little area where we've come to gather and have a snack?
Yeah, so this is technically a resting area on the Clough Island on the south end. It has a nice picnic table, a sandy spit. I think the one thing I want to say is that everything in life is better enjoyed shared with good company. And so I think that as we start to see more people visit the St. Louis River, it's different than the North Shore. It's going to be more secluded. So I think it's a really great place to bring your kids if you want to try out paddling with them. If you just want to see the town, just don't forget it's one of the hidden best secrets here in Duluth Superior region.
Leaving the island and paddling through some narrow channels that to me were quite reminiscent of the boreal forest of the Boundary Waters, I caught a glimpse of the cell towers and the hillside of Duluth in the distance. My heart dropped a little bit because it really felt like we were in a different place. And I'm so grateful that instead of paddling out towards the realms of industry and Canal Park, we took a right. I started paddling up, back up, where the Pokegama River enters the estuary.
It also looked like we were paddling up a milkshake or something that had stirred up the bottom of the river. And I thought at first it was maybe very shallow or had seen some rain or something had occurred that made it this way. But it seemed like that's just sort of the color of the river.
Indeed, the silty sandiness of South Shore sandstone. So prominent that you can see it from satellite, where that river empties into the estuary. There's a distinct change.
And then we also had that experience, which I hadn't seen since Isle Royal, where the water is appearing as though it actually is flowing the opposite direction of the current. It's sort of that mind-bending thing that we experienced at Isle Royal.
The Seiche?
Yes.
What do you remember?
From Isle Royal, I remember sitting there in our wooden structure in which we slept and occupied, kind of a tent for the night, if you will, and the current had been flowing one way out into Lake Superior from the creek, and then one moment it was suddenly going the other way, and I thought I'd lost my mind completely, which is still possible.
Thankfully, we've come to understand the Seiche as somewhat of the bathtub effect of Lake Superior, akin to the water sloshing around in the bathtub. It creates its own movements of water, and they're really obvious when you get up into channels that are directly connected to the lake, like we were in. And this was a special channel, not only for all these reasons, but this was a part of the Superior Municipal Forest. And out of all the landscapes we had been in thus far, that one felt very similar to the Boundary Waters.
It did. This was my favorite section of the day, and even though we'd been paddling for many hours at this point and been on the water and the sun and the wind energy and just things are a little lower certainly than when we started, I was just really rejuvenated and felt at home by that surrounding narrower river channel, incredible scenery, pine, and just lots of different trees. The whole scene had changed.
Indeed, we had sort of moved from the willows and the ash of that estuary into something that felt very boreal, even with the eagles perched and watching us paddle by. Deanna mentioning, let's reconvene at the weather station, just away from the launch. There's always a sense of calm, especially because we were out of the wind and it's late in the day and We were running from a bit of a potential storm cell, but the end was there. The day was long, but I still wasn't quite ready to get off the water yet.
So we all stopped and shared some positive reflection about the experience, and Deanna had the last word.
You know, a lot of the places that we paddled through earlier today are restored or saw really ecologically and in some ways culturally dark times, but this place, these wild rice beds have always been here, and people have riced them for a long time. And so when we were coming in here, there was a couple little baby rice plants just poking up on the surface of the water, and they're so delicate and small right now, but then eventually the bays on either side of us will look like a field. And hopefully in the late summer, early fall, we'll have students out here learning how to rice and process rice on the landing. And I think that's part of what is so amazing about this waterway, about the estuary, is we're in the middle of a city right now, and we can't see a house. We can hear the birds. There's, you know, the background sounds of the city, but we can really get lost in a place that's right here. And that's pretty amazing, and I think makes us really lucky in this region, in this area.
Well, you can look to Venus, you can look to Mars. I will set my sights by the northern star, and in the deep dark blue come the northern lights. Oh, and in the deep dark blue come the northern lights. Sing when I paddle canoe, feeling, not thinking if the strokes are true. We're gonna get through to the other side. Now, out in the night, the waves beat the shore. You can hear 'em pounding, you can hear 'em roar. Oh, roll me, rock me in my dreams. You can roll me, rock me in my dreams. So I like to sing, I love to dance. I play the fool if I got the chance. All around the campfire light, all around the campfire light, all around, all around, all around the campfire light.
What was that thing that you said right when you paddled up that you all had mentioned today?
None of us have ever paddled this far on the river, on the estuary, because when we are paddling long distance, well, a lot of times we're paddling for work, or we're in boats for work, or when we're paddling long distance, we're like loading up our packs and going up to the Boundary Waters or going up to the Quetico. But the Paddle and Portage cruise arrival was the best possible excuse to do a long paddle. And we loved it.
Yeah.
And our shoulders hurt.